All I can say is that Rhodey is a man of integrity. He's not gonna let himself get drunk, preach to Tony some more, while the strip. Oh, come on! The leader of the Ten Rings, who I will call Big Baldy, steps in and demands the Jericho to be completed by the next day. By holding Yinsen by the head and shoving a hot metal ball in his mouth. Pause.
Let's face it, this is not the worst thing you've caught me doing.
Are those bullet holes?
Well, it's been a long time coming. I always wanted to talk about the Infinity Saga. The movies that set the benchmark for comic book hero stories in cinema. Lately, Marvel has been falling on hard times, but this won't be the time nor the place to discuss Phase 4 onwards. Going forward, I will be discussing each movie from start to finish within the first three phases of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. For sanity's sake, I'll do this in order of theatrical release, from Iron Man to Spider-Man Far From Home. And as a bonus, I'll throw in Spider-Man No Way Home. For now, we'll begin with the man who started it all. Iron Man. Okay, first things first. We really have to talk about Robert Downey Jr. Except we don't discuss the details of his personal life. But we will say that Downey came from a humble dynasty of actors, including his father, Robert Downey Sr. Downey Jr., especially in his lively youth, enjoyed a long resume of performances, even as a singer and voice actor. Behind the scenes, however, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, as his personal life would take a massive nosedive all until the mid to late 2000s. Among the many individuals that helped change his life, Iron Man director Jon Favreau urged Marvel and Paramount to have him play the role of the Armored Avenger, which was a hard thing to do given Downey's checkered history. Eventually, they made the gamble and only to have the risk pay off. Of course, the process of making Downey a hero was far more difficult given the demands to make the experience as immersive as possible.
What?
Delivering a phenomenal screen test is one thing, but simulating the Iron Man experience is another. This is why you have to give your respects to the effects and animation teams for the hard work they put in. That's all the behind the scenes info for now. But feel free to comment more trivia about how this wonderful movie came to be. And while we're at it, don't forget to subscribe and tell friends about yours truly. Let's turn this into a place where we can discuss everything we like, ranging from anime, comic books, tokusatsu, video games, and all things pertaining to nerd culture. Let's make this wonderful nerd community grow. You help one, you help everyone. The movie begins at the Kunar province in Afghanistan. It's not long into this film, and we already get the best intro to our main man, Tony Stark, played by the GOAT, Robert Downey Jr. With a glass of liquor in hand, he entertains a group of young American soldiers as they escort him to the plane home. Favreau and the writers knew exactly what they were doing with this introduction, and it's there we get a good idea who Tony Stark is. Snarky, slick, humble when he wants to be, but not afraid to let you know that he's a big deal. He presents himself as a mood maker who's not afraid to break the tension in the room. He's a rich, self-loving asshole, but not enough to make you cringe really hard. Having said that, he eases the tension in the van by casually conversing with the troops, going from gender equality in the military to having a threesome with magazine models. You know, while we're at it, I have to bring up a scene that ended up on the cutting room floor. It's a scene where Tony and a few other rich boys had a party filled with women in revealing swimsuits, engaging in all manners of debauchery. It's a really spicy scene despite there being no nudity involved. But of course, the big guys at Paramount and Marvel scrapped it. Thankfully, it wasn't for the reasons we commonly see today, but instead it's because they wanted the movie to be marketable for younger audiences. While PG-13 films do show more graphic depictions of sex on the same level as with the aforementioned clip, Marvel didn't want to take too many risks when it came to the finished product. Before the troops could get a photo of Stark from MySpace, yes, MySpace, it was 2008, they're ambushed by missile fire. With his escorts sent to a John Hurt concert, Stark tries to make a run for it, only for karma and irony to deliver a package to him. Stark may have narrowly survived, but he is ultimately captured by terrorists, thus cutting to a title card. We cut to Las Vegas 36 hours ago. Tony is now the recipient of the Apogee Award for his achievements. The presentation serves two purposes for this scene. On one hand, it's a celebration of Tony's history and current feats. On the other hand, it gives the audience a summary on who Tony Stark is. Tony is the son of former Stark Industries CEO Howard Stark. Furthermore, he's a natural-born genius who has performed great feats of innovation at extremely young ages, such as making a circuit board at 4, and the first V8 engine 2 years later. On top of all that, he graduates summa cum laude from MIT at age 17. But being a kid with a high IQ comes at a price. For the young MIT graduate, he would lose both of his parents in a car accident. Right. Prompting Obadiah Stane, played by Jeff Bridges, to be the interim CEO until Stark turned 21. Tony finishes where his father and Stane left off in creating advanced weapons as a principal means of income. Now, forgive me for reaching, but I feel that the Rolling Stone cover really is foreshadowing Tony's real purpose in life. James, Rhodey Rhodes, played by Terrence Howard, presents the award to his friend, followed by a jazzy remake of the 60s Iron Man theme song. I remember this piece of fan service from Ghostface Killer's LP, Supreme Clientele, as he too was such a fan of Marvel Comics. He even donned the namesake many times in his music, ultimately appearing in the movie's soundtrack. I should also address the elephant in the room real quick. This is Howard's one and only time in an MCU due to payment disputes, so there's that. Rhodey gives the award to Stane because Stark is nowhere to be found. Stane is no Tony, but he understands why. Stark is always working. Except for he's not. He's gambling, taking advantage of his time in the Vegas Strip. Rhodey finds Tony gambling and reminds him of his award that he gives to a Roman Centurion cosplayer, because why not? Also, Tony's bodyguard is Happy Hogan, played by director Jon Favreau. Before they can go home, they're stopped by Christine Everhart, a journo from Vanity Fair. While she grills Tony with a couple of tough questions, Tony fires back with some well-placed counter-responses. With Everhart disarmed, she does a nice little spread for Tony. Spread. One thing to note also is that the things Tony's dad did would be expanded on in a later movie. If you know, you know. After putting the journo to sleep, she's woken up by the AI concierge, Darvis, played and voiced by Paul Bettany from A Knight's Tale. She then meets Pepper Potts, played by Gwyneth Paltrow, who promptly puts the trash in its rightful place.
Cleaning. I do anything and everything that Mr. Stark requires, including occasionally taking out the trash.
We cut to Tony tinkering with a hot rod, again showcasing his hobbies. Pepper gives him a rundown on his schedule, whereas Tony either shuts them down or has something done in place of him. She reminds him about her birthday and his flight to Afghanistan. If you couldn't tell, he's something of a lazy but talented guy in this scene. And as I stated earlier, weapons development has been a huge support system for his company, meaning he's letting the work do all of the heavy lifting while he enjoys his hobbies and minimal labor. After racing to the airport with Happy Hogan, Rhodey acts out of indifference and reminds Tony of how reckless he's acting as opposed to taking his position seriously. Of course, Tony isn't trying to hear all of this, and he tries to get his best friend to lighten up with some sake and strippers. It's not as explicit as it sounds. All I can say is that Rhodey is a man of integrity. He's not going to let himself get drunk, preach to Tony some more, while the strip... Oh, come on! Moving on. Tony makes it to Afghanistan and begins his presentation of his new weapon, the Jericho. Once again, the writers were in their bag on this one, highlighting Tony's mentality and ideology into the presentation. As badass as it is, it shows that he is one lazy but talented son of a bitch. Rhodey then tries to talk to Tony again, but he cuts him off before he can say anything, resulting in what we saw in the opening. Stark is held captive and given a battery-powered magnet to keep the missile shrapnel from entering his heart. When his captors come to see him, he notices that they have his guns, along with other merch from his company. One of the leaders of his group asks him to recreate the Jericho missiles, to which Tony says fuck you to the idea, only to take a little swim and be introduced to a nice shiny dose of reality. They tell him that if he remakes the Jericho, then he's a free man. But Tony calls bullshit on that and laments on what has happened. Yinsen reminds Tony of the fact that his weapons are not sold to just police and army men. Criminals and enemies of the world are also his top customers. Furthermore, it cements that Tony went into running the company with the belief that money is money no matter the customer. This mindset is not something that should be practiced in any business, as it attracts the wrong people more than a company that discerns its consumer base. This also comes with consequences that could harm the longevity of companies and the people in them. No job or career is without its weaknesses, but if any company willingly allows for criminal activity for profit, then it's doomed to fall one day, unless there's a systemic change in its practices. One thing is certain, that the Ten Rings don't intend on letting him live, even if he remakes the missiles, and if he dies here and now, his legacy will be reinforced with the corpses of innocent people. Tony internalizes this and decides that he has to put an end to this once and for all. Tony starts off with creating a miniature-sized arc reactor, which will power the magnet in his heart. Also, with the scraps he found in the cave, he gets to work on the armor that will get him and Yinsen out of Dodge. Stark asks him what he will do once he's free, and Yinsen responds by telling him that he will spend time with his family, who are also residents of Gomera. This is very important. During their process, however, the leader of the Ten Rings, who I will call Big Baldy, steps in and demands the Jericho to be completed by the next day, by holding Yinsen by the head and shoving a hot metal ball in his mouth. Pause. But Tony says that he needs him for the missiles to be completed. The boss demands again that the missiles be completed the following day. Of course, they say fuck no to that and finish where they began. That following morning, they set traps for the Ten Rings while activating the armor. As the small fly fall for the trap, Yinsen buys Stark time to ready the armor, much to his disapproval. The Mark I activates and Tony gets to work. Sadly, he finds Yinsen laid out by Big Baldy. And with his last breath, he reveals that his family was killed by the Ten Rings, with his death serving as returning to them. He also reminds Tony to not waste his life and start anew. And with that, Tony continues where he leaves off. And to the guy who thought it was a great idea to shoot Tony in the head with a gun while he's wearing a metal helmet, Jigo Jidoku da. Tony exits the cave and blasts the weapons to smithereens. It's a tough exit, but he manages to fly out of the danger. After shedding out of the armor and walking through the hot sands, Rhodes finds and saves him. Upon his return to the States, he asks for two things. No, not what you're thinking, you horn dogs in the back. Product placement and a press conference covering what happened to him. Also, guess what's better than one cheeseburger? Two, damn it. But to maintain the mood of the scene, we're introduced to a man named Agent Coulson of the Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement and Logistics Division, a private US-based defense organization hidden within the American government. Dude didn't come up with an abbreviation for the start of his debut, and neither will I. Marvel fans, if you know, you know. Tony talks about the young lives lost at the hands of his tech, the same tech he sold to armies and law enforcement agencies. He goes on record about the revelation he came to when he discovered the terrorists who were able to use them, and the lack of accountability his company has allowed since his time as CEO, as well as condemning his past business practices along with it. Plainly, he decides to immediately disband the weapons division of Stark Industries until he can find the cracks in the system. Stain quickly reads the room as, "Oh crap, we're going to be making Peter Parker money, but get no hose," and tries to defuse the tension by highlighting Tony's return. Tony and Stain have a chat about the situation, with the latter admonishing the former about removing the weapons division. Stark, of course, talks about the giant arc reactor his dad made and how Tony made a smaller but more powerful one for his heart. Obadiah tries to cover it up, calling the giant one as a means to silence the hipsters back in the 60s. He also assures Tony that he will cover things with the board and the critics. After the media mocks Tony's decision to shut down his main source of income, he summons Pepper to replace the mini reactor with a brand new one. Of course, she reluctantly helps him out while assuring his safety. Stark, still being Stark, tells Pepper to trash the old reactor. But does she do it? Find out in the next time on Iron Man's Yen. Speaking of no, Tony tries to talk to Rhodey about his new plan, only for his friend to tell him to get his shit together first. And Tony does just that. Tony goes to work on the Mark II, a sleek, mobile, and more advanced armor unit. This time Jarvis is integrated and comes complete with stabilizers and a heads-up display, which will be the most iconic HUD ever seen. Tony takes flight only to find that the metal is prone to freezing. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, the Ten Rings discover the remains of the Mark I Tony left behind and decide to go to work on remaking it. After a nice test run of the Mark II, Tony and Jarvis decide to make some improvements, this time using metal from his space satellite so that the armor won't freeze. He also decides to give the upgrade a gold and hot red coat as well, all while taking a trip to a gala to confound the press and his doubters. Stan Lee makes an appearance too. Coulson meets up with Tony to debrief him on his prior capture escape, but he brushes him off in favor of Pepper wearing a new dress, which is a very, very nice dress, and I know you guys see it too. As he offers to fetch his assistant a drink, Christine, whose cheeks Tony clapped earlier, confronts him with pictures of Gulmira being sacked by the Ten Rings, with his tech. Stark then confronts Obadiah about this, only to be told that the board went on to sell weapons from behind his back. With Obadiah and the board acting on greed, compounded by Gulmira being sieged, Tony decides to spring into action, giving us the most historical suit-up in the MCU. And now it's time to spin the block on the Ten Rings. He starts off by packing up the small fry, saving the citizens from danger, and essentially offering the sub-boss to be jumped by the townsfolk. Being the boss that he is, he proceeds to do this. After posing for a MySpace edit, he gets serious and obliterates every tank and missile launcher in sight. If it has his name on it, he's putting it in past tense. This attracts the attention of Big Baldy and the Air Force, and both want to know who in the heck is that metal man. Rhodey also weighs in on this, only for Tony to reveal himself by phone. The air chase results in Tony destroying the wing of one of the jets by accident, but he saves the pilot just in time. Rhodes covers this up as a training exercise, but Stain isn't buying it. Not wanting to live like the dude from The Big Lebowski, he meets up with the Ten Rings to discuss business. Simply put, after Howard and Maria would put on a t-shirt, Stain took over as CEO, but when Tony took over, he was offered by Stain to be held captive. Of course, the escape happened, which burned Baldy's face. Baldy talks about the armor that Tony left behind, and how he wants to make an army with it to rule the world. Stain, of course, sees the armor and decides, fuck you, and kills Baldy and his forces, snatching the armor and having R&D research the reactor. We also get this iconic moment.
Let's face it, this is not the worst thing you've caught me doing.
Are those bullet holes?
Meanwhile, Tony has Pepper hack the files from his office. She initially refuses, only for our hero to remind her of the time she has helped him when he was killing people, but now decides to back out when lives need to be saved. She ultimately decides to do so, only to remind him that he's all she has. This puts a lot of perspective on how Tony has been handling his life until now. Tony really wants to fix the mistakes he has made during his time as CEO, believing it to be his destiny to make a change, not just for himself or the company, but for the future of the world, recreating the legacy as Yinsen advised him to. Pepper heads to Tony's office to extract the information, including the video of Tony being held captive. Obi steps in and chats with Pepper about nothing, not realizing that she's hacked into the company files until it was too late. I have to admit, this is one of the tensest moments in the movie, as he was an intimidating force in the scene. Failure was not an option for Pepper, especially with Stain invading her personal space, affirming the dominance on her, without being over the top. It's a frightening thing to see. I was scared for her. As she sees Coulson, Stain finds out that the files from the company were hacked.
Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave! With a box of scraps!
Rather than chasing her down, he goes to Stark's place and snatches his mini-reactor, causing Stark to come seconds close to death. Now, you didn't think I would forget about the time Stark told Pepper to put the old reactor in the trash, did you? I hope not, because she decided to give it to Stark as a gift. Tony, holding on to dear life, tries to get it, only to collapse. But the dummy bot fetches it for him. Meanwhile, Coulson and his men join Pepper to stop Stain. Instead, they're met with a giant Mark I variant. Before this, Pepper calls Rhodey to help Tony. James makes it in time to help out, only to see his friend's new armor up close. As Tony prepares to steal off on Obi, he advises Rhodey not to get the military involved.
Next time, baby.
And here we have the climax. No, you horny degenerates. As Pepper is chased by Obi, Tony steps in and squares off against Stain. Stark juggles fighting him with minimalizing civilian casualties, but Stain is getting the upper hand, forcing Tony to use up all the sizable amount of energy in his suit. The stakes are too damn high right now, as Tony is on the brink of losing power trying to stop him, especially as he's being hurled up into the stars. But here's where Tony succeeds where Danvers fails.
How'd you solve the icing problem?
Icing problem.
Might want to look into it.
Tony sees the same flaws he had with the Mark I and Mark II in Stain's armor, and uses it to escape his death hug, because Tony learns from his mistakes. They both end up falling to where the giant arc reactor is, with Tony getting a little too comfortable. Recovered Stain goes for the kill after seeing this and tries to end it before Endgame comes. But at Tony's request, Pepper maxes out the arc reactor while he baits Stain into being close to it. A surge of power bursts through the sky, ending Obadiah's Stain once and for all. At another press conference, Stark, Potts, and Coulson talk about what happened up until this point. And at long last, Coulson has an abbreviation for his organization.
The Strategic Homeland and
Just call us S.H.I.E.L.D.
He also has a series of cue cards for Stark to read. But what happens next is the single most iconic yet crazy moment that will redefine hero movies and narrative. Tony Stark decides to let his nuts hang and say,
Truth is, I am Iron Man.
but we're not done yet. As Tony comes home, Jarvis is forcibly shut down, and a mysterious man in black lets him know that he is a part of a bigger universe beyond his understanding. He is revealed to be Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D., played by motherfucking Samuel L. Jackson.
Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Oh.
I'm here to talk to you about the Avenger Initiative.
And with that, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is born. Iron Man begins what is to become a cinematic anthology of Marvel history. While The Dark Knight has set the standard for superhero movies, Iron Man created a long-standing world that would keep the fans wondering what will happen next. This is a wonderful case study for a hero's origin story, with great writing, character representation, acting, and overall presentation. Marvel and Favreau wrote the blueprint for not only a superhero's beginning, but the rise of an expansive universe that would last a long time. Sure, changes were made, but the gamble has shown to pay off tremendously. I think it's a fantastic film, and a wonderful start to the MCU as well. Really give this movie a shot if you're new, or give it a rewatch if you're missing the splendor that started it all. You can watch this movie on video, download, or on the Disney Plus streaming service. Of course, as one hero's journey ends, another begins. The tale of a lonely man seeking peace amidst the rage is reborn. With that, we conclude 2008 with the release of The Incredible Hulk. Until next time, this is your friendly neighborhood Showa signing out. And I'll catch you true believers in the next video. Mata ne!